What CIA historians now describe as the most significant intelligence discovery since the Cold War began in the basement of a struggling single mother's century-old Victorian home. All triggered by one woman's determination to create a better life for her children, a decision that would bring black SUVs to her driveway at midnight and eventually reshape U.S. security protocols surrounding forgotten Cold War assets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The basement stairs creaked under Olivia Reeves's weight as she descended with a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other. At 38, the single mother of two had developed a knack for home improvement out of necessity rather than choice. 3 years after her divorce, her salary as a high school history teacher barely covered the mortgage on the old Victorian home that had seemed like such a bargain when she purchased it. The house, located in the quiet town of Millfield, Connecticut, had been built in 1897 and had clearly suffered from decades of neglect before Olivia had scraped together enough for a down payment. The real estate agent had euphemistically described it as having tremendous potential and historical character. Phrases Olivia now understood translated to requires constant repairs and nothing works properly. Today's project focused on the strange anomaly she'd discovered while measuring the basement for shelving. The dimensions didn't make sense. The basement was a full 12 feet shorter than the floor above it. After tapping along the northern wall, she'd detected a hollow sound behind what appeared to be a solid concrete surface. "Mom, did you find anything yet?" called her 13-year-old daughter Emma from the top of the stairs, her voice echoing against the century-old stone foundation. "Nothing yet, honey," Olivia called back, examining the seam she'd discovered where the newer concrete met the original stone foundation. "Can you make sure Liam finishes his homework? I'll be up in a bit." As Emma's footsteps retreated, Olivia positioned the crowbar against what appeared to be the weakest point in the concrete and pushed with all her strength. After several attempts, a chunk of material crumbled away, revealing something unexpected. Behind it, not dirt or structural material, but what appeared to be a metal door with no visible handle or hinges. "What in the world?" she murmured, clearing away more of the crumbling concrete. The flashlight beam caught something else, what looked like stenciled lettering beneath decades of grime. Olivia's pulse quickened. This wasn't just some walled-off storage space. This was something deliberately sealed and hidden from view. She worked methodically, clearing away chunks of concrete until she had exposed nearly 3 feet of the metal surface. It was definitely steel, thick and industrial, nothing like the materials used in residential construction. The more she uncovered, the more certain she became that this was no ordinary home improvement discovery. The past 3 years had taught Olivia resilience she never knew she possessed. The divorce had left her emotionally drained and financially vulnerable, with 2 young children depending entirely on her. Friends had questioned her decision to purchase the dilapidated Victorian rather than a more sensible apartment, but Olivia had been determined to provide her children with stability, a permanent home with a yard in a good school district, where they could put down roots despite their father's absence. The house had been affordable precisely because of its condition, a condition that required constant attention. Weekends that might have been spent relaxing were instead filled with painting, repairs, and learning plumbing and electrical skills through online tutorials and library books. The basement renovation represented her latest attempt to create more functional space in the cramped home. Storage shelves to organize the chaos that naturally accumulated with 2 active children. After an hour of careful work, she had exposed enough of the metal surface to confirm her suspicion. Someone had deliberately sealed off a portion of the basement behind a hastily constructed concrete wall. The metal surface appeared to be steel, with faded, stenciled markings partially visible beneath decades of grime. Wiping sweat from her brow, Olivia took a moment to catch her breath. The discovery raised dozens of questions. Who had sealed this door? When? And most importantly, what lay behind it? With a dampened rag, she carefully cleaned a section of the metal surface, revealing a government designation, US DOD SC 07734B, followed by a faded warning, authorized personnel only. Department of Defense, in her basement. The discovery made no sense. The house had belonged to an elderly woman named Margaret Winters before Olivia purchased it, and county records showed it had been in the Winters family for 3 generations. Prior, all civilians with no obvious government connections. Olivia sat back on her heels, mind racing. As a history teacher specializing in 20th century American history, she recognized that the designation style and materials suggested Cold War era, possibly late 1950s or early 1960s, when fallout shelters and government contingency sites had proliferated across the country. Her curriculum covered this period extensively, the paranoia and preparation that had characterized American life under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. But why here? In a private residence? And why? Sealed off rather than repurposed or removed. She snapped several photos with her phone before reluctantly heading upstairs to prepare dinner for Emma and 10-year-old Liam. The mysterious sealed room would have to wait until the kids were asleep. The last thing she needed was them spreading stories about a secret government facility under their house to their classmates. "Did you fix the basement, Mom?" Liam asked, as she stirred the pasta sauce, his homework spread across the kitchen table. His father's dark eyes looked up at her with innocent curiosity. "Not quite finished," she replied carefully. "There's some unusual construction down there. I need to figure out, can we help?" Emma asked, looking up from her phone with rare interest. Since the divorce, she had retreated into a digital world, her preteen challenges amplified by the family upheaval. "Not tonight," Olivia said firmly. "It's getting late, and there's too much dust and old concrete. Maybe this weekend we can work on it together when there's better light." The promise of inclusion seemed to satisfy them, at least temporarily. After dinner, homework check, and the bedtime routine that had become her anchor in the chaos of single parenthood, Olivia returned to the basement with better tools and lighting. 2 more hours of careful work exposed the full doorway, a reinforced steel barrier approximately 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, with no obvious mechanism for opening it from the outside. The construction was far more sophisticated than she had initially realized. This wasn't some homeowner's improvised fallout shelter. This was professional, military-grade installation. The implications were both exciting and unsettling. If this was indeed some sort of Cold War facility, it could potentially contain historical artifacts of significant value. As someone who had spent her career teaching about American history, the possibility of discovering a preserved piece of it in her own home was thrilling. On the other hand, government property, even long-forgotten installations, raised potential legal complications she couldn't afford to ignore as a single parent with limited resources. The last thing she needed was a property dispute with the federal government or liability issues from whatever might be sealed behind that door. She examined the exposed edges of the doorway, looking for any sign of a locking mechanism or control panel. Nothing was visible, which meant either the opening mechanism was elsewhere or, more likely, the door was designed to be opened only from the inside. The latter possibility raised disturbing questions about what might still be inside after all these decades. After careful consideration, Olivia decided to contact Dr. Marcus Chen, a colleague from the university where she occasionally taught summer courses As a professor specializing in Cold War history, he might provide insight without the immediate bureaucratic entanglements that would come with notifying government officials directly. A sealed room with DoD markings in your basement? Dr. Chen's skepticism was evident even over the phone. Olivia, are you sure this isn't just some elaborate fallout shelter? Many homeowners constructed them during that period, sometimes using surplus government materials. The marking codes are authentic Department of Defense format, Olivia insisted, and this isn't some homeowner project. The construction is military grade. We're talking about a steel door, at least 4 inches, thick with reinforced jambs set into the foundation. This is serious infrastructure, Marcus, not a weekend project. Could it be connected to something nearby? Any military installations or defense contractors in Millfield during that period? Nothing in any public record I could find, Olivia said, though I haven't had much time to research thoroughly. The county records show the house has been in the same family since 1926, until I bought it last year. What about the previous owner? Any connection to government work? Margaret Winters was 94 when she died. According to the neighbors, she was a retired school librarian who rarely left the house in her later years. Her husband died in the 1980s. He was supposedly an insurance salesman. The sound of typing came through the phone. And you say there's no way to open this door from your side? None that I can find. It seems designed to be opened from within, which makes no sense for a fallout shelter. Those were meant to be accessed from the house, not sealed off from it. After some persuasion, Dr. Chen agreed to visit the following day to examine the discovery. Don't try to open it further before I get there, he cautioned. If this is some sort of government facility, there could be liability issues. And don't tell anyone else about it until we know what we're dealing with. What neither of them could know was that Olivia's phone call had triggered automated monitoring systems designed to detect specific keyword combinations related to classified Cold War infrastructure, systems that had never been decommissioned. Despite the facilities, they monitored being long forgotten by all but a few specialized divisions within the intelligence community. In a nondescript office building in Northern Virginia, an alert notification appeared on a security monitor. The automated system had flagged a potential breach of installation SC-07734B, a facility officially listed as decommissioned and secured in 1974. The flagged conversation included accurate reference to the installation's designation code, which had never been declassified or published in any public document. Security protocols initiated an immediate escalation sequence, alerting increasingly senior personnel until reaching Derek Harlow, Deputy Director for Legacy Infrastructure Security at an agency whose official connection to the facility had been deliberately obscured through multiple layers of administrative reassignment over 5 decades. Harlow's immediate concern wasn't the forgotten facility itself, but the specificity of information Olivia Reeves had somehow obtained. The designation code she had mentioned was restricted information. Its appearance in civilian conversation represented a potential security breach that required immediate containment assessment. Within 20 minutes of Olivia's call to Dr. Chen, surveillance measures had been remotely activated on both their phones, and background assessments were being compiled on everyone connected to the Millfield property. Within an hour, a field team had been dispatched from the nearest regional office with instructions to assess the situation and secure the facility if necessary. Unaware of the machinery she had set in motion, Olivia spent the evening researching Cold War infrastructure projects in Connecticut. Her search revealed little of relevance. The state had hosted several military installations and defense contractor facilities, but nothing in publicly available records mentioned secret facilities in residential areas of Millfield. She did discover that the town had once housed a research division of Bell Laboratories during the early 1960s, working on what public records vaguely described as communications technology. The facility had closed in 1965, with all projects transferred to other locations. It seemed a tenuous connection at best, but perhaps worth exploring further. Around 10:30 p.m., while scrolling through digitized newspaper archives, Olivia found something potentially significant, a small article from April 1962 mentioning infrastructure improvements on several streets in Millfield, including Maple Street, where her house was located. The work was described as utility upgrades, but had been conducted by a contractor frequently used for government projects during that period. The timing aligned perfectly with the height of Cold War tensions, just months before the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. It was exactly when the government had been frantically building communication redundancies and continuity of government facilities throughout the country. She was about to search for additional information when an unusual email notification appeared. On her laptop, an alert from the County Historical Society responding to a request she hadn't made. The message was brief and puzzling. Research inquiry regarding 42 Maple Street property history. No additional information available beyond standard registry. All architectural modifications between 1958 and 1964 classified under Executive Order 109997. Please direct further inquiries to Department of Energy Historical Records Division. Olivia stared at the screen in confusion. She hadn't contacted the Historical Society, and the reference to Executive Order 10997 seemed oddly specific. A quick search revealed this was a Kennedy-era order assigning emergency powers to the Secretary of the Interior regarding water resources. Seemingly unrelated to her home or any basement modifications, something wasn't adding up. Either someone was playing an elaborate prank, or her discovery was connected to something more significant than a forgotten fallout shelter. The sudden appearance of this email, referencing her specific address and a classified executive order, couldn't be coincidental, especially since she hadn't initiated any such inquiry. As she pondered these developments, Olivia checked on her children, finding both peacefully asleep. Emma's history textbook lay open beside her bed, ironically turned to a chapter on the Cold War that Olivia herself had taught last semester. The image of a fallout shelter sign stared up from the page, a relic of an era when nuclear annihilation seemed not just possible but probable. Returning to her laptop, Olivia began a more targeted search on Executive Order 10997, trying to understand its possible connection to residential properties. She found little beyond the official text and basic historical context, until a reference in an obscure academic paper caught her attention. The paper discussing infrastructure redundancy during the Kennedy administration mentioned that several executive orders from that period had been used as administrative covers for classified projects unrelated to their stated purposes. Could that be the connection? A classified project hidden behind bureaucratic misdirection? It seemed like something straight from one of the conspiracy theory sites her students sometimes cited in their papers, except she now had concrete evidence of something unusual sealed beneath her home. As she continued researching, Olivia was startled by the sound of vehicles pulling into her driveway. Glancing at the clock, 11:42 p.m., she felt a surge of anxiety. No one had reason to visit at this hour, especially not multiple vehicles. Moving cautiously to the front window, she peered through the curtains to see 3 black SUVs with government plates parked in front of her home. Men in dark suits were already approaching her front door, while others established positions around the property perimeter. Olivia's heart raced as she considered her options. The children were asleep upstairs, and whatever was happening clearly connected to her basement discovery. Before she could decide on a course of action, a firm knock sounded at the front door. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 40s, with short dark hair and the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. Behind her stood two men in suits that practically screamed, "Government agent." With trembling hands, Olivia opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. "Ms. Reeves, I'm Special Agent Diana Morgan with the Department of Homeland Security." The woman held up credentials that Olivia had no way to verify. "We need to discuss the historical structure you've uncovered in your basement. May we come in? This matter concerns national security." The calm, authoritative tone did nothing to ease Olivia's growing alarm. How had they known about her discovery so quickly? She had only found the door hours ago and had told exactly one person, Dr. Chen. "It's almost midnight and my children are asleep," Olivia responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm not comfortable letting strangers into my home at this hour, regardless of what identification you're showing me." Agent Morgan's expression remained professionally neutral, but a slight shift in her posture suggested this wasn't the cooperation she had expected. "Ms. Reeves, I understand your concern. However, the facility beneath your home contains classified materials that have been sealed for over 5 decades. Its exposure presents significant security implications that require immediate assessment. We're not here to disturb your family, but this matter cannot wait until morning." Olivia's history teacher instincts kicked in. Something about this didn't align with standard protocols. If this is about historical materials, shouldn't the State Historical Preservation Office or National Archives be involved? And why Homeland Security rather than the Department of Defense, given the markings I found? A flicker of surprise crossed Agent Morgan's face before her professional mask returned. "You have an impressive understanding of bureaucratic jurisdictions. Ms. Reeves, unfortunately, I'm not at liberty to explain the interagency dynamics involved until we've secured the site. I can assure you that all relevant agencies have been notified according to established protocols." As their conversation continued at the partially opened door, Olivia noticed additional personnel emerging from the vehicles, carrying equipment, cases toward her home. The scale of response seemed wildly disproportionate for an old, sealed room, unless it contained something far more significant than historical artifacts. "I want to see official documentation specifically authorizing access to my property," Olivia insisted, her anxiety now mixed with growing indignation. "And I want confirmation from local law enforcement before I allow anyone inside. This is my home, and my children are here." Agent Morgan sighed, clearly reassessing her approach. "Ms. Reeves, we can certainly provide the documentation you're requesting. However, I should inform you that under the National Security Act provisions applicable to legacy infrastructure, we have authority to secure the site with or without homeowner cooperation. We'd strongly prefer to work with you, rather than escalate to measures that would be disruptive to your household." The implicit threat was clear, but Olivia stood her ground. "Then I suggest you begin with the documentation while I contact my attorney." As their standoff continued, neither woman could know that the sealed door in Olivia's basement protected much more than forgotten Cold War relics. The facility, designated SC-07734B, had been established in 1962 as something far more significant: a secure communication relay station designed to maintain government continuity in the event of nuclear attack, housing technology and contingency protocols that, even decades later, remained classified at the highest levels. What government officials didn't yet realize was that Olivia Reeves had inadvertently stumbled upon one of the missing pieces in a historical puzzle that multiple intelligence agencies had been trying to reconstruct for years, a forgotten node in a communications network whose full extent had been deliberately obscured even from those who had created it. The confrontation, At her doorway represented only the beginning of extraordinary events that would transform not just Olivia's understanding of American history, but potentially national security protocols surrounding thousands of similar forgotten facilities scattered across the country, all triggered by a single mother's home improvement project and her refusal to be intimidated when strangers arrived, claiming her basement contained a national secret. Dawn broke over Millfield, Connecticut, casting long shadows across Olivia Reeves's front yard, where the government vehicles remained parked, their presence drawing curious glances from early morning joggers and neighbors retrieving newspapers. The night had evolved into an uneasy stalemate. Agent Morgan's team had established a perimeter around the property, but had not attempted to enter without authorization, while Olivia had remained vigilant, alternating between monitoring the situation and checking on her sleeping children. By 6:30 a.m., Emma and Liam had awakened to find their home surrounded by serious-looking strangers in dark suits. Olivia had done her best to present the situation in terms that wouldn't frighten them. "These people work for the government," she explained as she prepared breakfast, maintaining a calm demeanor despite her exhaustion. "They're interested in the old room I found in the basement. It might be historically important." "Is that why there are men watching our house?" Liam asked, peering through the kitchen window at the agent positioned near their driveway. "Yes, honey. They're just being extra careful because old government things sometimes have special rules about who can see them." She poured cereal into bowls with steady hands, determined not to let her children sense her anxiety. Emma, more perceptive at 13, wasn't so easily reassured. "Mom, this is weird. Nobody sends government agents for old rooms unless it's something really serious. What's really down there?" "That's exactly what I'm trying to find out," Olivia replied honestly. "I don't know yet, but I'm being careful about how we proceed. I've called both our attorney and Dr. Chen from the university to help figure this out." The attorney, Paula Martinez, a friend from Olivia's college days who now practiced civil law in Hartford, had been skeptical when called at midnight, but had promised to arrive by 8:01 a.m. Dr. Chen had texted that he was driving in from New Haven as early as possible, bringing whatever historical documentation he could assemble on short notice. At 7:15 a.m., as Olivia was helping Liam pack his school bag, a firm knock came at the door. Agent Morgan stood on the porch, now accompanied by an older man whose bearing suggested even greater authority. His immaculate grey suit and carefully neutral expression spoke of decades navigating sensitive situations. "Ms. Reeves, I'm Deputy Director Lawrence Wilson from the Office of Legacy Infrastructure Security," he introduced himself when Olivia opened the door, still secured with the chain. "I've brought the documentation you requested and would like to discuss a mutually acceptable approach to this situation." Olivia studied the man carefully. Unlike Agent Morgan's intensity, Wilson projected calm reasonableness, which somehow made him seem more dangerous rather than less. People who felt the need to display authority often had less of it than those who simply assumed compliance. "My attorney will be here within the hour," she replied. "I'd prefer to wait until she can review any documentation you're providing." Wilson nodded as if this was entirely reasonable, though a flicker of impatience crossed his features. "Of course. However, I should mention that your children appear to be prepared for school." He gestured toward Emma and Liam, visible in the hallway behind her. "Our presence here has unfortunately created what might be perceived as an unusual situation. Perhaps we could arrange transportation to their school to minimize any potential distress or uncomfortable questions from their classmates or teachers." The offer, presented as considerate, carried clear subtext. The children's routine was being disrupted, and their presence complicated matters for everyone involved. Olivia recognized the negotiation tactic immediately. "My children will be attending school once I'm confident their home will remain secure in their absence," she countered. Their emotional well-being is my primary concern, which includes ensuring strange men don't enter their home while they're away. Wilson's smile remained in place, but his eyes hardened slightly. Miss Reeves, I assure you— Mom, we're going to be late, Emma interrupted, appearing beside Olivia at the door. The teenager studied the government officials with undisguised suspicion. Mr. Peterson gets super annoying about tardiness, and I have a math test first period. The domestic interruption momentarily destabilized the official facade. Wilson blinked, clearly recalibrating his approach in the face of ordinary family logistics that wouldn't yield to national security concerns. Olivia made a quick decision. Emma, please text Mrs. Sanderson next door. Ask if she can drive you and Liam to school today. Tell her I'll explain everything later. As Emma retreated to send the message, Olivia turned back to Wilson. Deputy Director, I appreciate your concern for my children's routine. However, until my attorney reviews your documentation and I understand exactly what's happening here, I won't be authorizing any access to my property. If this facility has been safely sealed for decades, another few hours won't change anything. Wilson's expression suggested he wasn't accustomed to such firm resistance, particularly from a civilian. Ms. Reeves, while I respect your caution, I should clarify that the classification level of installation SC-07734B necessitates immediate security protocols regardless of its dormant status. The relevant statutes provide clear authority for— I teach American history, Deputy Director, Olivia interrupted. I'm familiar with how classification has been used throughout our nation's past, sometimes appropriately and sometimes not. I'm also aware that homeowner rights can't be casually dismissed, even for national security claims, without proper judicial review. So unless you have a specific court order, which I notice you haven't mentioned, I'll wait for my attorney before proceeding further. The reference to her professional background seemed to trigger a reassessment in Wilson's approach. He exchanged a glance with Agent Morgan before responding. Your background explains your handling of this situation, he acknowledged. Most civilians would have either panicked or granted immediate access when confronted with federal agents. Your measured response suggests someone accustomed to evaluating historical claims critically. He handed her a sealed envelope. These documents outline our authority and the historical context of the installation within classification constraints. I believe you'll find them enlightening, particularly given your academic specialty. We'll await your attorney's arrival before proceeding further. As Wilson returned to one of the vehicles, Olivia's neighbor, Caroline Sanderson, pulled into the driveway, looking alarmed at the government presence. After a brief, carefully vague explanation about historical preservation issues, Olivia sent her children off to school with instructions to text her throughout the day. Alone in the house, she opened Wilson's envelope and found several documents on official letterhead. The top page bore the seal of the Department of Energy alongside unfamiliar acronyms, with a title that immediately captured her attention: Historical Brief, Eastern Communications Continuity Network, 1960-1974. The document described a nationwide program established during the Kennedy administration to create redundant communication systems that would survive nuclear attack. Unlike the better-known continuity of government facilities built to house officials during crisis, this network focused on maintaining communication infrastructure through distributed nodes concealed in ordinary-seeming locations. According to the brief, installation SC-07734B had been one of 17 relay stations constructed within existing residential properties in the northeastern United States. The facilities were built using a host property approach, where homeowners with specific professional backgrounds were recruited to allow construction beneath their properties in exchange for financial compensation and the understanding that they were contributing to national security. in the case of 42 Maple Street. The original host had been Thomas Winters, the supposedly unremarkable insurance salesman who had owned the house in the early 1960s. The brief noted cryptically that Winters had relevant technical expertise and security clearance through prior service, but provided no further details about his actual role. The most significant revelation came in a paragraph marked Declassified 2018. The relay stations had been designed not just for emergency communications, but also to serve as secure transmission points for intelligence gathered from Soviet bloc nations. Each station contained specialized equipment for receiving, decoding, and relaying encrypted transmissions that could be gathered by operatives in the field. This explained the extraordinary response to her discovery. She hadn't just stumbled upon a forgotten fallout shelter or communications node. She had potentially exposed a covert intelligence facility whose full capabilities might still be classified. The final pages outlined the legal framework under which the government claimed authority to secure the installation, a complex web of national security directives, executive orders, and classified provisions that essentially asserted perpetual access rights regardless of property ownership. Changes. The document specifically noted that while the network had been officially decommissioned in 1974, certain technologies and documentation within the facilities remained classified at the highest levels. Olivia was still processing this information when her phone rang, Dr. Chen calling from his car. "Olivia, I'm about 15 minutes away, but something very strange is happening," he said, his normally measured academic tone edged with concern. "I've been pulled over twice already this morning by state troopers claiming routine checks. And when I stopped for coffee, a man approached me showing Homeland Security credentials, asking about my relationship with you and my interest in Cold War infrastructure. They're monitoring our communications," Olivia realized aloud. "They knew about the discovery almost immediately after I called you last night." That would explain it. "Listen, before I arrive, what exactly did you find?" "The designation code. You mentioned SC0734B doesn't match any documented fallout shelter or civil defense installation in Connecticut. I checked every database I could access." "It's not a fallout shelter," Olivia replied, glancing at the document spread before her. "According to what they've given me, it's some sort of intelligence communication relay disguised as an ordinary basement. Apparently, the government recruited homeowners to host these facilities during the Kennedy administration." Chen's sharp intake of breath was audible even through the phone. "The ECCN. That was largely considered theoretical by most historians, a proposed network mentioned in a few declassified memos, but never confirmed as actually constructed. If you found physical evidence of its existence, that's historically significant." What network?" Olivia asked. "Eastern Communications Continuity Network. It was supposedly designed not just for nuclear contingency, but also for intelligence gathering during normal operations. Historians have debated whether it ever moved beyond planning stages." His voice lowered. "Olivia, if that's what you've found, no wonder they responded so quickly. You've potentially uncovered physical evidence of a classified intelligence program that hasn't been fully acknowledged even decades later." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Paula Martinez, whose sensible sedan looked distinctly out of place among the government vehicles. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman in her late 30s, with a reputation for tenacity in civil cases, surveyed the scene with professional interest as she approached the house. "When you said government agents at midnight, I thought you might be exaggerating," Paula remarked after Olivia let her in. "This is quite the response team for a historical preservation issue." After reviewing the documents Wilson had provided, Paula's expression grew increasingly serious. "This is well outside My usual practice area, but I understand enough to recognize the complexity. They're asserting continuing security interest based on classified technology and documentation that remains protected regardless of the installation's operational status. Can they just force their way in? Olivia asked. Legally? It's complicated. The property rights issues alone would make for fascinating appellate litigation. Paula tapped the documents thoughtfully. But practically speaking, they have resources and authority that would eventually prevail in court. The question is whether fighting them serves your interests or potentially creates more problems. Dr. Chen arrived minutes later, his academic demeanor at odds with the tense situation. After introductions and a quick briefing on what Olivia had learned, he requested to see the sealed door himself. If this is indeed part of the ECCN, it represents a significant historical discovery, he explained as they descended to the basement. Most of what we know about Cold War infrastructure comes from documentation rather than preserved physical evidence. The exposed doorway looked even more imposing in daylight, filtering through the small basement windows. Chen examined the designation markings with barely contained excitement, photographing them carefully with his phone. These are consistent with Department of Defense protocols from the early 1960s, he confirmed, and the installation date stamped. Here, March 1962, aligns perfectly with the peak construction period following the Berlin crisis when nuclear tensions were escalating rapidly. His inspection was interrupted by Paula calling down the stairs. Olivia, Deputy Director Wilson is requesting to speak with you again. He says they've received authorization to share additional information that might address your concerns. Upstairs, Wilson waited in the living room, now accompanied by an elderly man who seemed distinctly out of place among the government agents. In his 80s, with carefully combed white hair and the slightly stooped posture of advanced age, he wore a tweed jacket and bow tie that suggested academic rather than governmental affiliation. Ms. Reeves, this is Dr. Harold Kimball, Wilson introduced. He was involved with the original ECCN program and has been brought in as a consultant to help address the historical context of your discovery. The elderly man extended a slightly trembling hand. Ms. Reeves, I understand you've uncovered something that has been forgotten by almost everyone, including, until recently, most of the agencies that helped create it. His voice carried the gravitas of someone who had witnessed history rather than merely studied it. Olivia shook his hand, noting the intelligence still sharp in his pale blue eyes, despite his physical frailty. Dr. Kimball was a senior engineer. With Bell Laboratories in the early 1960s, Wilson explained, he helped design the communication systems installed at sites like SC-07734B. Given your concerns about this operation, we thought his perspective might be valuable. I'm more than just an engineer, Deputy Director, Kimball corrected mildly. I was Program Director for the Eastern Seaboard implementation. And Ms. Reeves deserves the full context, not just the sanitized briefing you've provided. Wilson's expression suggested this wasn't the approach he had anticipated from the elderly consultant. Dr. Kimball, we've agreed to certain parameters regarding classified. Young man, I've held security clearances since before your parents were born, Kimball interrupted with surprising firmness. And at my age, I'm more concerned with historical accuracy than bureaucratic sensitivities. Ms. Reeves has inadvertently discovered something significant, and she deserves to understand what's beneath her home. The authoritative tone from the elderly engineer temporarily silenced Wilson, creating an opening that Kimball immediately exploited. Ms. Reeves, the installation beneath your home was never just a communication relay, though that was part of its function, he began, settling himself carefully into an armchair. It was one node in what we called the Distributed Intelligence Network, a system designed to maintain both communication and data integrity during nuclear crisis. He gestured toward the documents Olivia had been provided. What they haven't told you is that your particular installation was designated as a repository node. It contains not just communication equipment, but also a secure data storage facility, housing duplicate records of critical intelligence gathered during the most sensitive period of the Cold War. Wilson's jaw tightened, but he made no move to interrupt as Kimball continued. The homeowner, Thomas Winters, wasn't just a random recruit. He was a former signals intelligence specialist who had worked on early encryption systems during the Korean War. His insurance job was cover for ongoing consultation work with intelligence agencies. He allowed the installation to be built beneath his home as part of a program that placed similar facilities in properties owned by individuals with appropriate backgrounds and security clearances. Olivia tried to reconcile this information with the ordinary family history she had learned about the house, but his wife, Margaret, was a school librarian. She lived here until just before I purchased the property. How could she not have mentioned any of this when selling the house? Kimball smiled slightly. Margaret Winters was actually a language analyst with the Foreign Broadcast Information Service before becoming a librarian. Their entire public identity was constructed to provide cover for their involvement with classified programs. After Thomas died in 1984, Margaret maintained the security protocols regarding the installation, which included never acknowledging its existence, even when selling the property decades later. This revelation cast everything Olivia had learned about the house's history in a new light. The unremarkable family who had owned it for generations had actually been intelligence operatives, maintaining a secret government facility beneath the ordinary-seeming Victorian home. "What exactly is stored down there?" Olivia asked, trying to grasp the implications, and why such an intense response to its discovery after all this time. Kimball glanced at Wilson, who reluctantly nodded permission for him to continue. The repository nodes contained microfilm archives of the most sensitive intelligence gathered between 1962 and 1974, including materials related to Soviet strategic capabilities, double-agent operations, and certain domestic surveillance programs that remain classified even today. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. But what truly concerns our friends here isn't just the historical intelligence, it's the technology. The ECCN developed encryption and communication systems that were decades ahead of their time, some principles of which remain in use in current classified systems. Exposure of the original technology could potentially compromise aspects of modern security protocols, Wilson interjected, apparently feeling Kimball had revealed enough. Which is why securing the installation is a matter of current national security, not merely historical preservation. Ms. Reeves, now that you understand the significance, I hope you'll cooperate with our team's assessment of the facility's condition. Dr. Chen, who had been listening with increasing fascination, couldn't contain himself any longer. This represents an extraordinary historical discovery. The physical evidence of covert Cold War infrastructure is incredibly rare. Most was dismantled or repurposed decades ago. There could be invaluable historical artifacts preserved inside. The historical value is precisely why we're proposing a collaborative approach. Wilson responded smoothly. Our technical team needs to secure any still classified materials or technology, but we recognize the legitimate historical interest. With appropriate security measures, we could potentially document the facility's historical aspects while protecting sensitive components. Olivia exchanged glances with Paula, who gave a slight nod, suggesting this might represent a workable compromise. However, a crucial question remained unanswered. What happens to my home in all this? Olivia asked directly. I have 2 children and limited resources. I can't afford disruption to our lives or damage to the property I'm still paying a mortgage on. Wilson's response was carefully measured. The government acknowledges its responsibility regarding infrastructure installed under previous security programs. If you allow our team to access and secure the facility, we're authorized to provide compensation for any disruption or necessary modifications to your property. Compensation? Paula interjected, her attorney instincts immediately engaged. What specifically are you offering? Wilson produced another document. A formal agreement outlining financial terms for both immediate access and ongoing security arrangements. The government is prepared to cover any mortgage obligations on the property while maintaining your full ownership rights, with additional compensation for cooperation and discretion regarding classified aspects of the discovery. The document detailed a financial package that would essentially eliminate Olivia's mortgage debt while providing substantial additional funds, enough to completely renovate the aging Victorian and establish college funds for both children. The generosity of the terms suggested just how eager the government was to quietly resolve the situation. "This seems almost too good to be true," Olivia said cautiously. "What exactly would my obligations be under this agreement?" "Primarily, allowing secured access to the installation and maintaining discretion regarding classified information," Wilson explained. "You and your family would continue living in the home normally, with minimal disruption once the initial assessment and securing process is complete." Dr. Kimball, who had been observing the negotiation with interest, offered his perspective. "Ms. Reeves, if I may, what you've discovered presents both parties with problems and opportunities. The government needs to secure potentially sensitive historical materials, while you've unexpectedly found yourself responsible for a classified facility you never knew existed. This agreement acknowledges both realities in a mutually beneficial way." Olivia considered the proposal carefully. The financial terms would transform her family's precarious situation into one of security and opportunity. However, the historian, in her, couldn't help questioning what might be lost if she simply allowed government agents to remove or redact whatever they deemed sensitive from what could be a unique historical resource. "I want a condition added," she stated finally. "Dr. Chen or another qualified historian should be permitted to document the facility before any materials are removed, with the understanding that historical documentation would be reviewed for classification concerns but not completely suppressed." Wilson frowned slightly. "That presents certain security challenges, which can be addressed through appropriate clearance procedures," Dr. Kimball interrupted. "It's a reasonable request that honors both security requirements and historical significance. The program has remained classified for over 5 decades. Surely we can find a balanced approach to documentation now." After several minutes of discussion and Paula's careful review of the proposed amendments, a revised agreement was prepared. The final terms included proper historical documentation with appropriate security reviews, financial compensation addressing Olivia's mortgage and home, renovation needs, and protocols for any future access that might be required for security maintenance. By early afternoon, with the agreement signed and her attorney satisfied that her interests had been protected, Olivia found herself standing with Wilson, Kimball, and a small technical team at the sealed door in her basement. The government agents had brought specialized equipment to access the supposedly inaccessible entrance. The security systems were designed to preserve access capability even after decades of dormancy, Kimball explained, as the technical team attached what appeared to be a sophisticated electronic device to specific points on the door's surface. Electromagnetic triggers embedded in the door structure respond to calibrated field generators, matched to the original security protocols. As the team activated their equipment, a series of previously invisible mechanical components within the door became audible, clicks and whirs of systems awakening after decades of silence. With a final metallic thunk, the massive steel barrier shifted slightly inward. Pneumatic assist systems, Kimball noted with evident pride in engineering that had survived untouched since the Kennedy administration, designed to function even without external power supplies. The technical team carefully pushed the heavy door open, revealing a small airlock-style entry chamber with another sealed door beyond it. The space was illuminated by emergency lighting that had automatically activated, another system designed to function after decades without maintenance. "Remarkable preservation," Dr. Chen murmured, documenting everything with his camera under the watchful eye of a security officer tasked with reviewing all images for classification concerns. The inner door required additional security measures, with Kimball providing historical context for each step in the process. Dual authentication systems were standard for repository nodes, physical keys combined with knowledge-based verification. Fortunately, our technical team has the override. Protocols. When the final door opened, Olivia found herself looking into a perfectly preserved time capsule from the height of the Cold War. The installation extended beneath her property and partially under the street beyond it, a space approximately 30 feet square, filled with equipment racks, workstations, and storage systems that represented the cutting edge of early 1960s technology. Dr. Chen seemed at a loss for words, his academic detachment momentarily overwhelmed by the historical significance of what they were witnessing. "This is the most perfectly preserved Cold War intelligence facility I've ever seen or even heard of. Everything is exactly as it was left." Kimball moved slowly through the space, his expression suggesting a complex mix of professional pride and personal nostalgia. "We designed these facilities to maintain operational readiness indefinitely. Environmental controls, power systems, with multiple redundancies, preservation protocols for archived materials, everything created to survive both time and potential attack." The center of the room held what appeared to be communication equipment with multiple transmission systems. Around the perimeter, securely sealed cabinets likely contained the microfilm archives Kimball had mentioned. A small desk in one corner held personal items presumably belonging to Thomas Winters, a coffee mug, notepad, and even a pipe in an ashtray, left exactly as they had been when the facility was last accessed decades earlier. Olivia stood in the doorway, watching as the technical team began a methodical assessment of the facility's systems and contents. The historian in her recognized the extraordinary significance of this preserved piece of Cold War history, while the practical single mother calculated how the agreement she had negotiated would transform her family's future. What had begun as a simple home improvement project had uncovered a forgotten piece of American history, a secret government installation that had remained hidden beneath an ordinary home for over 5 decades. The discovery would not only change her family's financial circumstances, but also contribute valuable historical documentation about a classified program that had shaped Cold War intelligence operations. As the technical team worked, Kimball approached Olivia with a knowing smile. "You know, Ms. Reeves, I helped design 17 of these facilities across the eastern seaboard. This is the first one I've seen reopen since the program was decommissioned. There are likely dozens more still out, there forgotten beneath ordinary homes and buildings waiting to be rediscovered." The implication was clear. Her discovery might represent just the beginning of a larger historical revelation about the hidden infrastructure of America's Cold War intelligence operations. The sealed door she had found in her basement had opened, not just to a forgotten government facility, but potentially to a new understanding of how extensively the invisible architecture of national security had been integrated into ordinary American communities during one of history's most dangerous periods. Wilson, observing their conversation from across the room, clearly recognized the historical significance even while focusing on current security implications. The documentation process he had agreed to would ensure this unique discovery wouldn't simply disappear again behind classified barriers, but would contribute, with appropriate security reviews, to a more complete understanding of Cold War history. For Olivia, the government facility beneath her home represented both an unexpected solution to her family's financial challenges and a connection to history that resonated with her professional passion. The single mother, who had been struggling to maintain an aging Victorian while raising 2 children on a teacher's salary, had inadvertently uncovered a national secret that would transform her family's circumstances while contributing to historical knowledge about a crucial period in American history. As she watched Dr. Chen meticulously documenting the preserved Cold War facility, Olivia couldn't help but appreciate the irony. The history teacher had literally found history buried beneath her home, connecting her family to a secret chapter of American national security that had remained hidden for over half a century. 3 weeks after the discovery of installation SC-07734B beneath her Victorian home, Olivia Reeves sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents that had fundamentally changed her understanding of both American history and her own property. The government assessment team had completed their initial work, cataloging and securing classified materials while permitting Dr. Chen to document the historical aspects of the facility under careful supervision. The financial agreement had proceeded exactly as promised. Her mortgage had been paid in full, with additional funds transferred to accounts established for home renovation and educational trusts for Emma and Liam. The transformation of her financial circumstances still seemed surreal, shifting her from precarious stability to genuine security with a single signature. What occupied her attention this morning, however, wasn't financial matters, but the historical documentation Dr. Chen had been permitted to share after security review. The photographs and detailed descriptions painted a comprehensive picture of the installation's purpose and capabilities, with only specific technical details redacted from the historical record. "Mum, are the government people coming back today?" Liam asked, entering the kitchen in pajamas despite the late morning hour. Weekend routines had relaxed considerably since the financial pressures had eased. "Just Dr. Kimball," Olivia replied, gathering the documents into a folder. "He's bringing some historical materials he thought might interest us about the house's original owners." The elderly engineer had become an unexpected ally throughout the process, advocating for maximum historical transparency while still respecting legitimate security concerns. His perspective as someone who had helped create the original installation provided unique insight that neither current officials nor academic historians could offer. Emma appeared in the doorway, her typical teenage reticence temporarily suspended by genuine curiosity. "Are we allowed to tell people about what's under our house yet? Jenna keeps asking why there were government vehicles here for days." "Remember what we discussed," Olivia reminded her gently. "We can acknowledge that a Cold War historical site was discovered on the property, but specific details remain restricted for national security reasons." The carefully crafted public explanation had been part of the agreement, acknowledging the historical discovery while maintaining discretion regarding classified aspects. Local media had run small stories about a Cold War-era civil defense installation found during home renovations, with quotes from historical preservation officials about its significance. The true nature of the intelligence facility remained classified, with only vague references to communication capabilities permitted in public statements. "It's still weird," Emma observed, reaching for the orange juice. "Like we're living above this secret spy place and pretending it's just some normal fallout shelter." Olivia couldn't entirely disagree. The transition had been surreal, from discovering a sealed door to negotiating with intelligence officials, to now living with the knowledge that her basement connected to a classified Cold War facility. The government had installed a new, more conventional-looking door where the concrete wall had once been, with sophisticated security systems disguised as ordinary locks. Only authorized personnel could now access the installation, though Olivia retained formal ownership of the property itself. The doorbell rang, announcing Dr. Kimball's arrival. Despite his advanced age, he had maintained regular involvement with the project, seemingly energized by the opportunity to revisit his Cold War work. Today, he arrived with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm and the same bow tie and tweed jacket that seemed to be his invariable uniform. "Ms. Reeves, thank you for allowing this weekend visit," he began, after settling at the kitchen table. "After our discussions about the house's previous owners, I thought you might appreciate some materials I've been authorized to share regarding Thomas and Margaret Winters." From his portfolio, he produced a folder stamped with declassified markers and security review notifications. Thomas Winters wasn't just any signals intelligence specialist. He was part of a program that made some of the most significant cryptographic breakthroughs of the early Cold War period. The folder contained photographs showing a much younger Thomas Winters in military uniform during the Korean War, and later in civilian clothes at what appeared to be Bell Laboratories facilities. His unremarkable appearance gave no hint of his apparently significant contributions to national security. "And Margaret?" Olivia asked, examining the photos with interest. "You mentioned she was a language analyst rather than just a librarian." Kimball smiled. "Margaret Chen Winters was one of the most talented linguists in the Foreign Broadcast Information Service. She specialized in Russian dialectical variations and could identify the regional origin of Soviet communications with remarkable precision." He pulled out another photograph showing a young Asian American woman in professional attire from the early 1960s. Her librarian cover was particularly effective because she actually had studied library science before being recruited for government service. The revelation of Margaret's Chinese-American heritage added another layer to Olivia's understanding of the couple. "That must have been unusual in intelligence circles during that era," she observed. "Exceedingly rare," Kimball confirmed. "The intelligence community was not known for its diversity in the 1950s and 60s. Margaret faced considerable obstacles, but was simply too talented to ignore. Her analytical assessments of Soviet communications influenced significant policy decisions during the Kennedy and Johnson administrations." Emma, who had been hovering near the conversation, picked up one of the photographs. "She worked as a spy while everyone thought she was just a librarian. That's actually pretty cool." "Intelligence analyst rather than spy," Kimball corrected gently. "But yes, her public identity was intentionally understated. Both Thomas and Margaret exemplified an approach to intelligence work that emphasized quiet expertise rather than dramatic field operations." The doorbell rang again, this time announcing Dr. Chen's arrival. The historian had become a regular visitor, his academic interest in the discovery evolving into a book project tentatively titled Hidden Networks, the Secret Infrastructure of Cold War America, with appropriate security reviews built into the publication process. As Olivia welcomed him in, she noticed he carried several document folders similar to those Kimball had brought. "I've received clearance to share some extraordinary contextual materials," Chen explained, after greetings were exchanged. The historical significance of your discovery continues to expand as more connections are established with other recently declassified programs. Over the next hour, Chen and Kimball presented complementary perspectives on the historical significance of installation SC-7734B. Chen approached it from an academic historian's viewpoint, placing the facility within broader Cold War contexts, while Kimball provided insider technical details about its creation and operation. What's becoming clear, Chen explained, spreading documents across the table, is that your installation wasn't just one random node in a forgotten network. It was a critical junction point connecting several different intelligence systems that were deliberately kept separate from each other for security compartmentalization. Kimball nodded in agreement. The facility's designation as a repository node meant it contained duplicate records from multiple collection sources, a redundancy measure ensuring critical intelligence wouldn't be lost if primary facilities were compromised or destroyed. The documents Chen had brought included recently declassified maps showing the approximate locations of similar facilities throughout the northeastern United States. Millfield's position had been strategically selected for its proximity to both major urban centers and the Atlantic coast, allowing it to serve as a relay point for both domestic and international communications. The truly remarkable aspect, Chen continued, is how thoroughly these installations were integrated into ordinary communities. Current estimates suggest there may be hundreds of similar facilities nationwide that remain unaccounted for in public. Records, sealed beneath homes, businesses, and public buildings, with their origins obscured by decades of administrative reassignments. Olivia surveyed the materials with growing fascination. So my discovery might actually help locate other forgotten installations? Precisely, Kimball confirmed. The documentation preserved in your facility included administrative records that identify several previously unknown sites. The security protocols established during your agreement will guide approaches to any future discoveries. The conversation paused as Emma and Liam, increasingly interested in these historical revelations, joined them at the table. Kimball seemed pleased by their curiosity, answering their questions about Cold War technology with grandfatherly patience that contrasted with his former role creating classified intelligence systems. Did people really think there was going to be a nuclear war? Liam asked, examining a civil defense pamphlet Chen had brought as contextual material. We didn't just think it possible, we considered it probable, Kimball replied soberly. Everything we built, from fallout shelters to communication networks to family emergency plans, was created with the expectation that nuclear conflict would eventually occur. That perspective shaped an entire generation's approach to both technology and daily life. That's kind of like climate change now, Emma observed unexpectedly. Everyone knows it's happening, but we still go to school and plan for college like everything's normal, even though the news keeps saying the world's in trouble. The parallel struck Olivia as remarkably insightful. Existential threats shaped societies, whether acknowledged directly or not. The constant background awareness of potential catastrophe influencing decisions at both policy and personal levels. A perceptive comparison, Chen noted. Both eras feature threats that seem simultaneously immediate and distant, potentially apocalyptic, but abstract enough to compartmentalize in daily life. The conversation might have continued along this philosophical direction, if not for the sudden buzzing of Kimball's phone. His expression changed as he read the message, professional focus replacing conversational ease. It appears our historical discussion has intersected with current developments, he said carefully. Deputy Director Wilson is requesting permission to visit with some colleagues from the technical assessment team. They've discovered something in the archive materials requiring immediate consultation. Olivia hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The past weeks had established sufficient trust with both Kimball and the government team that initial suspicions had largely been replaced by collaborative curiosity about the installation's significance. Wilson arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by two individuals Olivia recognized from the technical team that had initially assessed the installation. Their expressions suggested urgency barely contained by professional restraint. "Ms. Reeves, Dr. Kimball, Dr. Chen," Wilson greeted them formally. "Thank you for accommodating this unscheduled visit. A situation has developed regarding materials recovered from the installation that potentially changes our understanding of its historical significance." He placed a secure tablet on the table, displaying images of what appeared to be microfilm frames. The archival materials included communication transcripts that were incorrectly catalogued during the facility's decommissioning in 1974. These records reference a program code named Weathervane that doesn't correspond to any documented operation from that period. Kimball leaned forward, studying the images with sudden intensity. These formatting markers indicate critic-level priority communications. That classification was reserved for intelligence considered critical to national security, requiring immediate attention at the highest levels. "Precisely," Wilson confirmed, "which raises significant questions about an undocumented program operating at that priority level. Our analysts have been working to contextualize these materials within known historical operations, but significant gaps remain." He turned to Kimball with careful respect for the elderly engineer's historical knowledge. "Dr. Kimball, given your position within the original ECCN program, we're hoping you might provide insight regarding weathervane references. The operation appears to have utilized communication protocols you personally helped develop." Kimball's expression revealed nothing, but a subtle tension in his posture suggested the question had touched something significant. "Weathervane wasn't a standard intelligence operation," he said finally. "It was a verification protocol established after the Cuban Missile Crisis to monitor compliance with the subsequent withdrawal agreements. We've found no documentation of such a protocol in declassified materials," Wilson observed. "You wouldn't have," Kimball replied. "Weathervane was established through direct presidential authorization outside normal intelligence channels. Only a handful of individuals knew of its existence, primarily because it involved surveillance capabilities that neither side officially acknowledged possessing." The revelation hung in the air momentarily. Even Dr. Chen, the professional historian, seemed startled by this glimpse of previously unknown Cold War operations. "Are you suggesting," Wilson asked carefully, "that installation SC-00734B was receiving verification intelligence regarding Soviet missile deployments through channels, not documented in official records?" "Not just receiving," Kimball corrected. "This facility was specifically designated for weathervane communications because of its unique position within the network, technically part of the ECCN, but administratively separated through specialized clearance protocols. Thomas Winters was one of the few field operators with direct knowledge of the program." Olivia tried to process the implications. Her unremarkable Victorian home in Millfield, Connecticut, had apparently housed not just a standard Cold War communication facility, but a specialized node for one of the most sensitive, undocumented intelligence operations of the era. "The historical significance just increased substantially," Dr. Chen observed, professional excitement evident despite his attempt at academic detachment. "If weathervane materials have been preserved here, they could provide unprecedented insight into post-Cuban Missile Crisis security arrangements that shaped subsequent decades of nuclear policy." Wilson nodded agreement, "which is precisely why I've been authorized to request expanded access to complete a comprehensive assessment of all archived materials. The historical documentation process Dr. Chen has been conducting would continue, with appropriate security reviews, but with recognition that we're potentially dealing with a different category of historical significance. The conversation continued into technical details that quickly exceeded Olivia's knowledge of intelligence operations, with Kimball providing historical context that even Wilson's current intelligence background couldn't match. The generational knowledge transfer happening at her kitchen table represented an extraordinary intersection of past and present security concerns. Emma and Liam had retreated to the living room, sensing the conversation had shifted from general historical interest to more sensitive matters. Their adaptation to the strange circumstances surrounding their home had been remarkably resilient, accepting the peculiar reality of living above a classified Cold War facility with the flexibility characteristic of childhood. As the discussion progressed, Olivia found herself contemplating how profoundly her life had changed in the week since discovering the sealed door. Beyond the financial transformation that had eliminated her most pressing concerns, her perspective had expanded through direct contact with historical events that had previously been abstract teaching topics. The Cold War had become tangible. In her basement, connecting her ordinary home to extraordinary moments in American history. Ms. Reeves, Wilson addressed her directly, interrupting her reflections. Given these developments, we'd like to propose an amended agreement regarding the installation. The historical significance now appears substantially greater than initially assessed, potentially warranting expanded documentation efforts and possibly selective declassification of certain materials for historical research. What would that mean practically? Olivia asked, always mindful of how these developments might affect her family's daily life. Primarily, additional technical team visits to complete comprehensive cataloging of all archived materials, Wilson explained. The basic parameters of our existing agreement would remain unchanged, but with expanded scope for historical documentation, given the weather vane connection. Dr. Chen couldn't contain his professional excitement. This represents an unprecedented opportunity to document aspects of Cold War intelligence operations that have remained completely unknown to historians. With appropriate security measures, we could significantly enhance understanding of how verification systems operated during this critical period. The enthusiasm of both current officials and historical experts suggested that Olivia's basement had become considerably more significant than anyone had initially realized. What had begun as a simple home renovation had uncovered not just a standard Cold War facility, but potentially an archive of undocumented intelligence operations that had shaped nuclear policy during some of the Cold War's most dangerous moments. "I'd like something in return," Olivia stated, seeing an opportunity in their evident interest. "My students at Millfield High should benefit from this historical discovery, even if specific classified details remain restricted." "What are you proposing?" Wilson asked cautiously. "An educational program, properly reviewed for security concerns, that allows students to understand Cold War history through local connections. Nothing revealing classified technology or operations, but contextual understanding of how national security infrastructure was integrated into ordinary communities." The request seemed to surprise Wilson, who had clearly anticipated financial or property-related demands rather than educational considerations. Dr. Chen immediately supported the idea, seeing its potential for meaningful historical education. Beyond traditional textbook approaches, we could develop materials that use declassified aspects of the discovery to illuminate broader historical patterns, Chen suggested. Students would gain unprecedented insight into how national security operations functioned within civilian contexts during the Cold War. After brief consultation with his colleagues, Wilson agreed with surprising readiness. that could be arranged through appropriate educational liaisons and security review protocols. In fact, the educational component might serve broader national security interests by contextualizing historical security measures within proper historical frameworks. This unexpected convergence of educational opportunity and security interests represented perfect symmetry for Olivia, allowing her to connect her roles as homeowner and history teacher in meaningful ways. The sealed door she had discovered would provide her students with unique insight into how abstract historical forces manifested in their own community. As the meeting concluded with agreements for next steps regarding both the weather vane materials and the educational initiative, Olivia found herself reflecting on how thoroughly her discovery had transformed not just her personal circumstances, but potentially historical understanding of Cold War operations. Dr. Kimball remained behind after the others departed, seemingly wanting to share something outside official channels. His expression suggested the weight of decades-old responsibilities still carried personal significance. "Ms. Reeves, there's something about Thomas and Margaret Winters you should know that won't appear in any declassified files," he began once they were alone. "They weren't just skilled professionals following orders. They specifically volunteered. They're home for the weather vane connection because they believed verification systems were essential to preventing nuclear conflict." He gazed around the kitchen, so different now from when the Winters had lived there, yet connected to their legacy in unexpected ways. "Thomas once told me that having the facility beneath his family home reminded him daily of exactly what was at stake in our work. Not abstract national security concepts, but real homes and families that would be destroyed if verification systems failed to prevent nuclear escalation." This personal glimpse of the previous owner's motivations added emotional resonance to the historical significance. The Winters hadn't been merely government employees following career paths. They had intentionally placed themselves at a critical junction of nuclear security, precisely because they understood the human stakes involved. "Thank you for sharing that," Olivia said quietly. "It helps me understand why they would accept something so extraordinary beneath their ordinary-seeming life. They would have appreciated knowing their home passed to a history teacher," Kimball observed with a slight smile. "Margaret always believed historical understanding was essential to preventing repetition of dangerous patterns. Your educational initiative would have pleased her immensely." After Kimball's departure, Olivia rejoined her children in the living room, finding them engaged in typical weekend activities that seemed incongruously normal given the historical revelations occurring simultaneously in their home. Emma scrolled through social media while Liam built elaborate structures in a Minecraft world, ordinary childhood experiences unfolding above extraordinary Cold War infrastructure. "So what did they find this time?" Emma asked without looking up from her phone, her tone suggesting she had adapted to government officials, appearing with historical revelations as simply another aspect of their household routine. "It turns out our basement was connected to something even more historically significant than they initially thought," Olivia explained, keeping details appropriately vague. "And I've arranged for some special educational materials about Cold War history for my students." "Are you going to tell them about our spy basement?" Liam asked, looking up from his game. "Not exactly," Olivia replied carefully. "But they'll learn about how national security systems were integrated into ordinary communities during that period. It's important history that isn't covered well in standard textbooks." "Cool," Liam replied simply, before returning to his digital construction project. The casual acceptance reflected children's remarkable adaptability, incorporating extraordinary circumstances into their understanding of normal life with flexibility adults often struggled to match. Over the following months, the implications of Olivia's discovery continued to expand in both historical and personal dimensions. The weather vane materials revealed previously undocumented verification systems that had helped stabilize nuclear tensions during critical Cold War periods, providing historians with new perspectives on how superpower confrontations had been. Managed behind official diplomacy, the technical teams completed their comprehensive assessment, securing classified materials while allowing unprecedented historical documentation under appropriate security reviews. Dr. Chen's book project evolved to include a significant section on weather vane operations, bringing previously unknown aspects of Cold War history into scholarly understanding for the first time. The educational initiative Olivia had requested developed into a model program, with security-reviewed materials, allowing students to understand how national security infrastructure had been integrated into ordinary American communities during the Cold War. Without revealing sensitive technical details, the program illuminated how abstract historical forces had manifested in local contexts, connecting textbook history to tangible community experience. For Olivia personally, the discovery had transformed both her financial circumstances and her effectiveness as a history teacher. The mortgage-free Victorian was undergoing careful renovation, preserving its historical character while addressing long-deferred maintenance. Her classroom presentations now carried the authority of direct connection to previously classified aspects of Cold War history, engaging students through local relevance rather than abstract narratives. Emma and Liam had adapted to their changed circumstances with remarkable resilience. The financial security had eliminated the constant background stress that had pervaded their lives since the divorce, while the historical significance of their home had provided unexpected educational benefits. Emma had even developed sufficient interest in Cold War history to select it as the topic for her honors research project, interviewing Dr. Kimball about technical aspects of the period with growing scholarly sophistication. 6 months after the initial discovery, Olivia hosted a small gathering in her renovated living room. Dr. Chen had received final security clearance for the first chapter of his book, which documented the historical significance of installation SC-07734B without compromising sensitive technical details. Dr. Kimball, Deputy Director Wilson, and even Olivia's attorney Paula had gathered to mark this milestone in the ongoing process of balancing historical documentation with security considerations. "To think this all began with measuring for basement shelves," Paula remarked, raising her glass in a toast. "From home improvement project to national security revelation in one unexpected discovery." "History is often found in overlooked places," Dr. Chen noted. "The most significant discoveries frequently come from questioning apparent discrepancies in ordinary contexts, rather than dramatic expeditions to exotic locations." Wilson, who had gradually shifted from initial security concerns to genuine appreciation for the historical significance, offered his perspective. "This process has actually helped us develop better protocols for addressing similar discoveries in the future. Given the extensive infrastructure established during the Cold War, it's likely other installations remain undocumented in current records." "There are definitely more waiting to be found," Kimball confirmed, with the certainty of someone who had helped create the original network. The compartmentalization was intentional. Different agencies establishing infrastructure without centralized documentation to prevent any single security breach from compromising the entire system. The conversation continued around historical significance and future implications, but Olivia found herself contemplating more personal aspects of the discovery. Beyond the financial transformation and historical revelations, she had gained something less tangible but equally valuable: a connection to hidden history that had shaped American life during a pivotal historical period. Her home now existed in her awareness as both ordinary domestic space and historically significant site. The kitchen, where she prepared family meals, positioned above classified Cold War infrastructure that had helped prevent nuclear conflict. The dual nature of the property seemed an appropriate metaphor for how history itself operated, with momentous events and ordinary life continuously overlapping in ways rarely recognized in standard historical narratives. As the evening concluded and guests departed, Olivia stood on her front porch, watching Dr. Kimball being assisted to his car. The elderly engineer who had helped create the classified network decades earlier had found unexpected purpose in helping document its historical significance, connecting his life's classified work to proper historical understanding after decades of necessary secrecy. The Victorian home, now beautifully renovated while preserving its historical character, revealed nothing unusual to passing neighbors or casual observers. Its secrets remained largely hidden, known only to those with specific clearance or direct involvement in the discovery. This too seemed appropriate. The most significant aspects of history often concealed beneath ordinary appearances, waiting for someone to notice discrepancies that revealed hidden dimensions of American experience. For Olivia, the sealed door in her basement had opened not just to a forgotten government facility, but to a deeper understanding of how thoroughly extraordinary historical forces had been integrated into ordinary American communities during one of history's most dangerous periods. The single mother who had simply been trying to create better storage space for her children had inadvertently uncovered a physical connection to historical forces that had shaped the modern world in ways few people fully understood. As she turned to close the door, Olivia reflected that her discovery represented just one of potentially hundreds of similar forgotten facilities scattered throughout ordinary American communities, physical remnants of how thoroughly the architecture of national security had been woven into everyday life during the Cold War. The history teacher had discovered history in the most literal sense, connecting her family's ordinary home to extraordinary moments in American national security that continued to shape current understanding of how nuclear confrontation had been managed during civilization's most dangerous period. 3 years after discovering the sealed door in her basement, Olivia Reeves stood in the newly established Millfield Historical Center, surveying the exhibition that had grown from her accidental discovery. Hidden in plain sight, Cold War infrastructure in American communities occupied the main gallery space, drawing visitors from across the country interested in this previously undocumented aspect of American history. The carefully curated exhibits included declassified photographs of installation SC07734B, technical diagrams with sensitive details appropriately redacted, and contextual materials explaining how national security infrastructure had been integrated into ordinary residential communities during the height of Cold War tensions. A scale model of her Victorian home, complete with cutaway basement showing. The general layout of the facility served as the exhibition's centerpiece. "Mom, there's another school group coming in 10 minutes," Emma called from the reception area where she worked part-time while completing her senior year of high school. Now 17, she had developed a sophisticated understanding of Cold War history that far exceeded typical high school curriculum, shaped by direct connection to classified aspects of the period. "Thanks, honey. I'll finish setting up the presentation room," Olivia replied, making final adjustments to the educational display she would use for her lecture. The Millfield Historical Center represented just one outcome of the extraordinary chain of events triggered by her basement renovation project. What had begun as a simple home improvement effort had evolved into a nationally recognized educational initiative, professional advancement, and fundamental reassessment of how Cold War infrastructure had been integrated into civilian communities. Dr. Chen's book, Hidden Networks, The Secret Infrastructure of Cold War America, had become a critically acclaimed work that transformed historical understanding of how national security operations had functioned during the most dangerous period of nuclear confrontation. With appropriate security reviews preventing disclosure of still sensitive technical details, the book had nonetheless revealed previously undocumented aspects of how verification systems had helped stabilize superpower relations during critical periods. For Olivia personally, the discovery had created opportunities that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Beyond the financial security established through the government agreement, her expertise regarding Cold War community infrastructure had led to a part-time position at the State University, where she taught specialized courses on local manifestations of national security history alongside her continued high school teaching. The educational program she had requested as part of the original agreement had expanded far beyond initial expectations. What began as supplementary materials for her own students had developed into a nationally recognized curriculum model, adopted by schools throughout the country for teaching how abstract Cold War policies had manifested in tangible community contexts. Liam, now 13, entered the exhibition space carrying a tablet computer. "Dr. Kimball just arrived, Mum. He says he has something important to show you before the presentation." Dr. Harold Kimball had become a regular presence in their lives, his initial role as government consultant evolving into something resembling a grandfather figure to Emma and Liam. At 85, he remained remarkably sharp, despite increasing physical frailty, his encyclopedic knowledge of classified Cold War infrastructure making him an invaluable resource for historical documentation efforts. Olivia found him waiting in the small research library adjacent to the main exhibition space, his ever-present bow tie slightly askew against his tweed jacket. The elderly engineer's eyes still sparkled with intellectual engagement despite the physical toll of advancing age. "Ms. Reeves, or should I say, Professor Reeves now, given your university appointment." He greeted her with characteristic formality, warmed by genuine affection. "I've received clearance to share something I believe you'll find quite significant for today's presentation." From his leather portfolio, the same one he had carried since their first meeting 3 years earlier, he produced a folder bearing recent declassification markings. The Security Review Committee has approved release of additional weather vane documentation, including materials specifically connected to Thomas and Margaret Winter's role in the program. The folder contained photographs and documents Olivia had never seen before, showing Thomas and Margaret Winters in professional contexts that revealed their significance to national security operations more clearly than previous materials. One photograph showed Margaret receiving a classified commendation, while another depicted Thomas with senior government officials in what appeared to be a secure facility similar to the installation beneath Olivia's home. "These were classified at the highest levels until recently," Kimball explained. "The comprehensive historical review triggered by your discovery has led to reassessment of what truly requires continued classification versus what can now be appropriately acknowledged for historical understanding." Most significant among the newly declassified materials was a memorandum written by Thomas Winters in 1962, explaining why he had volunteered his home for the weather vane installation. The document, written with remarkable eloquence for a technical specialist, articulated a deeply personal commitment to preventing nuclear conflict through verification systems that could build trust between superpowers without requiring public acknowledgement. "I offer my home for this installation," Winters had written, "with full understanding that neither my contribution nor the system's existence can be publicly acknowledged for decades, if ever. I do so because I believe verification represents our best hope for managing nuclear risks that threaten not abstract national interests, but real homes and families like my own. By placing this facility beneath the house where my children sleep, I maintain constant awareness of exactly what our work protects." Olivia read the document with growing emotion, recognizing in Thomas Winters' words the same commitment to future generations that drove her own educational mission. The parallel between his decision to integrate national security infrastructure into his family home and her efforts to integrate historical understanding into educational curriculum created unexpected resonance across decades. "He would be pleased with what you've created here," Kimball observed, gesturing toward the exhibition space beyond. Both Thomas and Margaret believed deeply in the importance of historical understanding, even while recognizing that their own contributions might never be fully acknowledged due to classification requirements. The newly declassified materials added significant dimension to the exhibition, providing human context for institutional infrastructure that might otherwise seem coldly technical. The personal motivations and professional ethics of those who had created and maintained these hidden systems represented crucial aspects of Cold War history rarely captured in traditional security narratives. As Olivia prepared to incorporate these new materials into her presentation, Deputy Director Wilson arrived at the Historical Center, his presence no longer generating the tension it had during their early interactions. Over 3 years of collaboration regarding historical documentation and security reviews, professional respect had developed between the intelligence official and the history teacher, whose discovery had triggered reassessment of classification protocols surrounding forgotten Cold War infrastructure. "Professor Reeves, I see Dr. Kimball has delivered the newly declassified materials," Wilson observed. "There's something additional you should know for context. The comprehensive review process initiated by your discovery has identified 47 similar installations nationwide that remained unaccounted for in current security protocols. The documentation preserved in your facility provided critical reference information, enabling us to locate these forgotten sites. This revelation confirmed what Kimball had suggested earlier, that Olivia's discovery represented just one node in a far more extensive network of classified infrastructure integrated into ordinary communities during the Cold War. The historical significance extended far beyond her individual property to encompass broad reassessment of how national security operations had functioned during that crucial period. "We've established a dedicated task force for addressing these forgotten facilities," Wilson continued. "The protocols developed through your case are now being implemented nationwide, balancing legitimate security considerations with appropriate historical documentation and property owner interests." The systematic approach represented significant evolution from the emergency response that had brought government vehicles to Olivia's driveway that night, 3 years earlier. Her discovery had not only revealed forgotten infrastructure, but had catalyzed development of more sophisticated protocols for managing similar situations, an institutional legacy extending beyond historical documentation to current security practices. As school buses arrived outside the historical center, Olivia prepared to welcome students from neighboring communities for the educational program she had developed. The curriculum used declassified aspects of Cold War infrastructure to illuminate broader historical patterns, helping students understand how national security operations had functioned within their own communities during periods of international tension. The visiting students, typically high school juniors and seniors studying advanced history, would experience a multifaceted program combining exhibition tours, documentary materials, and interactive elements designed to make Cold War history tangible rather than abstract. The program had received national recognition for innovative historical education methods, with educators from across the country visiting to observe its implementation. Olivia watched as Emma efficiently organized the arriving students into groups, her daughter's confidence and poise reflecting how thoroughly the discovery had shaped her development. What began as a frightening midnight confrontation with government agents had evolved into educational opportunities and historical understanding that had profoundly influenced Emma's academic interests and career aspirations. Now preparing college, applications focused on history and international relations programs, Emma had developed sophisticated perspective on how classified operations shaped international stability during critical periods. Her personal essay, carefully reviewed for security considerations, discussed growing up above a formally classified Cold War facility and how this unique circumstance had transformed her understanding of how history functioned beyond textbook narratives. Liam had been equally influenced, though in different directions. His interest had focused on the technical aspects of Cold War communication systems, leading to participation in specialized STEM programs, exploring how encryption and secure communication methods had evolved from Cold War applications to current digital security. At 13, he already demonstrated technical understanding that impressed even the specialists, still maintaining the secure aspects of the installation beneath their home. As Olivia prepared to begin her presentation to the visiting students, she reflected on how thoroughly her accidental discovery had transformed not just her professional opportunities, but her effectiveness as an educator. The history teacher had literally found history beneath her home, creating tangible connection between abstract historical forces and local community context that made past events relevant to current understanding in ways traditional curriculum rarely achieved. "Good morning, everyone," she began as students settled into the presentation room. "Today, we'll be exploring how national security infrastructure was integrated into ordinary American communities during the Cold War and what these hidden systems can teach us about how history functions beyond official narratives." The presentation incorporated newly declassified materials alongside previously approved content, using the specific example of installation SC-07734B to illuminate broader patterns of how classified operations had been conducted within civilian contexts. Without revealing still sensitive technical details, Olivia helped students understand how thoroughly national security considerations had shaped community development during periods when nuclear confrontation seemed imminent. History isn't just something that happens in capitals and crisis meetings, she explained, displaying photographs of ordinary seeming homes that had concealed classified infrastructure. It unfolds in ordinary communities, often hidden beneath normal daily life, in ways rarely recognized by those experiencing it. The most significant historical developments frequently occur in overlooked contexts, rather than obvious centers of power. Following the formal presentation, students toured the exhibition space, engaging with interactive elements designed to illuminate how seemingly abstract Cold War policies had manifested in tangible community infrastructure. The program had been carefully designed to respect classified limitations, while still providing meaningful historical understanding of how national security operations had functioned during that critical period. Dr. Chen joined the activities. Midday, bringing advance copies of his new book, expanding on themes explored in his original work. Forgotten networks, rediscovering Cold War infrastructure, built upon the continued declassification process, incorporating newly available materials, while maintaining appropriate security boundaries regarding still sensitive technical aspects. The historical reassessment triggered by your discovery continues to expand, Chen told Olivia during a brief break between student groups. What began as documentation of one forgotten facility has evolved into comprehensive reassessment of how classified Cold War infrastructure functioned throughout American communities. The historical understanding we're developing challenges fundamental assumptions about how national security operations were integrated into civilian contexts. This academic validation complemented the educational impact Olivia witnessed directly through student engagement. The discovery that had begun with a simple home renovation project had created ripple effects through historical scholarship, security protocols, educational curriculum, and public understanding of how classified operations had shaped community development during crucial historical periods. As the educational program concluded and students departed, Olivia found a moment of quiet reflection in the exhibition space. The scale model of her Victorian home, with its hidden underground facility, seemed an appropriate metaphor for how history itself functioned. Significant developments often concealed beneath ordinary appearances, waiting for someone to notice discrepancies that revealed hidden dimensions of American experience. Dr. Kimball joined her, his expression suggesting appreciation for what had been accomplished since that first midnight confrontation 3 years earlier. When we designed these facilities in the early 1960s, we never anticipated how they might eventually contribute to historical understanding, he observed. Our focus was entirely operational, creating systems that could function during the worst scenarios imaginable. Yet you created them within ordinary communities, beneath homes where families lived normal lives despite extraordinary circumstances, Olivia noted. That integration of national security infrastructure into civilian contexts reveals something important about how American society functioned during the Cold War. Precisely, Kimball agreed. The separation between classified operations and ordinary life was simultaneously absolute in security terms and non-existent in physical reality. That paradox shaped entire generations who lived with nuclear threat as constant background to otherwise normal experiences. This philosophical perspective had become central to both the exhibition and the educational curriculum, highlighting how historical forces operated simultaneously in institutional frameworks and ordinary community contexts, often without conscious recognition by those experiencing them directly. The sealed door Olivia had discovered represented physical manifestation of this historical principle, connecting abstract national security policies to tangible community infrastructure. Later that evening, returning to her beautifully renovated Victorian home with Emma and Liam, Olivia reflected on how thoroughly their lives had been transformed by what began as simple home improvement frustration. The struggling single mother, facing financial pressure and career limitations, had become nationally recognized educator with expanded professional opportunities and financial security. The children adapting to post-divorce challenges had found unique educational advantages and career direction through direct connection to historically significant circumstances. The basement door, now an unobtrusive installation with sophisticated security systems disguised as ordinary fixtures, still connected their home to the classified facility below. Authorized personnel occasionally visited for maintenance or continued documentation, but the installation's primary significance had shifted from operational security to historical understanding. What had once been active infrastructure of national Security operations had become preserved historical resource, contributing to sophisticated understanding of how Cold War tensions had manifested in American communities. 5 years after discovering the sealed door during basement renovation, Olivia hosted a small gathering to mark an important milestone. The comprehensive historical review, triggered by her discovery, had reached sufficient completion for public acknowledgement of a previously classified aspect of American history: the systematic integration of national security infrastructure into ordinary residential communities during the Cold War. Deputy Director Wilson, now heading the specialized division addressing forgotten Cold War facilities, brought official recognition of how Olivia's discovery had transformed both historical understanding and current security protocols. Dr. Chen presented advance copies of his third book on the subject, which synthesized findings from multiple discovered facilities into comprehensive analysis of how classified operations had functioned within civilian contexts. Dr. Kimball, increasingly frail but intellectually sharp as ever, provided historical perspective from his unique position as someone who had helped create the original infrastructure. What began with one sealed door in Millfield, Connecticut has expanded into national reassessment of Cold War infrastructure, Wilson observed. As the small group gathered in Olivia's living room, the documentation preserved in your installation provided critical reference information that helped locate dozens of similar facilities nationwide, each contributing additional perspective to historical understanding while requiring appropriate security measures. The historical narrative has been fundamentally enhanced, Dr. Chen added. We now understand that classified operations were far more thoroughly integrated into ordinary communities than previously documented, creating infrastructure network that shaped American development during crucial Cold War periods without public awareness. For Olivia, however, the most meaningful outcome remained educational rather than historical or institutional. The curriculum she had developed using declassified aspects of her discovery now reached thousands of students nationwide, helping them understand how abstract historical forces manifested in tangible community contexts. The history teacher had created educational framework that made past events relevant to current understanding in ways traditional textbooks rarely achieved. Emma, now preparing to attend Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service with scholarship support, had developed sophisticated understanding of how classified operations shaped international stability during critical periods. Her personal experience growing up above formerly classified Cold War facility had transformed academic interest into potential career path, exploring how historical patterns influenced current international relations. Liam, flourishing in specialized STEM programs exploring technological development, had found direction through exposure to historical aspects of communication security. At 15, he already participated in educational initiatives, examining how encryption methods evolved from Cold War applications to current digital security frameworks, building technical understanding that connected historical development to current challenges. As their guests departed that evening, Olivia stood on the porch of her Victorian home, watching Dr. Kimball being helped to his car by his caregiver. The elderly engineer, who had helped create classified networks during history's most dangerous period, had found unexpected purpose in his final years, helping document their historical significance for future generations. His transition from creating classified systems to explaining their historical context represented personal journey, paralleling broader institutional evolution from operational security to historical understanding. Returning inside, Olivia descended to the basement, where everything had begun 5 years earlier with simple measurement discrepancy. The sealed door that had once concealed forgotten government facility now connected her ordinary home to nationally recognized historical resource, physical manifestation of how national security operations had been integrated into civilian contexts. During the Cold War, what had begun as frustrating home renovation challenge had transformed not just her family's circumstances, but potentially historical understanding nationwide. The struggling single mother, who had simply been trying to create better storage space, had inadvertently triggered reassessment of how classified operations had functioned within American communities during crucial historical periods. As she prepared lectures for both high school students and university seminars, Olivia reflected on how thoroughly her accidental discovery had transformed her professional effectiveness. The history teacher had literally found history beneath her home, creating tangible connection between abstract historical forces and local community that made past events relevant in ways traditional curriculum rarely achieved. 10 years after discovering the sealed door in her basement, Olivia stood in the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where a new permanent exhibition on Cold War America Hidden Infrastructure of National Security featured installation SC-07734B as primary case study in how classified operations had been integrated into ordinary communities. The comprehensive historical review triggered by her discovery had reached sufficient completion for major national institution to incorporate this previously undocumented aspect of American history into its permanent collection. The museum exhibition represented culmination of historical reassessment process that had begun with one homeowner's accidental discovery during basement renovation. What started as simple home improvement project had expanded into national reconsideration of how classified Cold War infrastructure had shaped American communities without public awareness, connecting abstract historical forces to tangible local contexts in ways that transformed understanding of how national security operations had functioned during history's most dangerous period. For the history teacher who had simply been trying to create better storage space for her children, the legacy extended far beyond professional recognition or institutional acknowledgement. The educational curriculum she had developed using declassified aspects of her discovery now reached students nationwide, making historical understanding accessible through tangible community connections rather than abstract narratives. The single mother, who had accidentally uncovered forgotten government facility, had created educational framework that transformed how students understood the relationship between classified operations and ordinary communities during crucial historical periods. What government officials had once claimed as national secret beneath her Victorian home had become valuable historical resource, contributing to sophisticated understanding of how Cold War tensions manifested in American communities. The sealed door, discovered during simple home renovation, had opened not just to forgotten government facility, but to deeper appreciation of how thoroughly national security considerations had shaped community development during periods when nuclear confrontation seemed imminent. But ordinary life nonetheless continued. The history teacher had literally found history beneath her home, creating connections between abstract historical forces and local community contexts that transformed understanding of how classified operations had functioned within ordinary American life during one of history's most dangerous periods. The accidental discovery during basement renovation had revealed not just forgotten government facility, but fundamental historical principle. That significant developments often remain hidden beneath ordinary appearances, their influence shaping communities in ways rarely recognized by those experiencing them directly. As new generations of students engaged with the curriculum she had developed, Olivia found satisfaction transcending professional recognition or institutional acknowledgement. The single mother who had struggled to balance home renovation with teaching responsibilities had created educational framework that made historical understanding accessible through tangible community connections rather than abstract narratives. What began as simple home improvement project had evolved into comprehensive reassessment of how classified operations had shaped American development during crucial historical periods, connecting national security infrastructure to ordinary communities in ways that transformed understanding of how Cold War tensions had manifested in everyday American life. The history beneath Olivia Reeves's Victorian home had transformed not just her family's circumstances, but potentially historical understanding nationwide, all triggered by one single mother's determination to create better storage space during basement renovation and her refusal to be intimidated when strangers arrived claiming her cellar contained a national secret. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.